Alright, so today we're going to go first through how to respond to an argument. Then we're going to be learning a bit more about cross-examination, how to ask questions of your opponent, how to think of good questions and where to go with those questions. And then we're going to be putting everything we've learned so far, how to create a case, how to think of arguments, how to think of cross-examination questions. We're going to be putting all of those together and building our own cases using a simple resolution. So, first, how to respond to an argument. So, responses. Responses are a vital part of debate. Imagine if you're the affirmative and you stood up and read your case, and then the negative came up and he read his case, and then the round was over. It was just that. You just read your own cases and just let the judge decide. That would not be a very fun form of debate because there would be no way of convincing the judge that the other side was wrong. You'd only hear the good things about each side. So that is why we have time during the rebuttal speeches to respond to the arguments the other side just made. Now, another reason why responses are a vital part of debate is because if you do not respond to an argument, that argument is considered to be dropped. That simply means that my opponent hasn't said anything against it. And the reason why this is important is because a dropped argument implies that you agree with it. Your opponent can legally stand up and say, Judge, the affirmative hasn't responded to my value of life. This means that he agrees with me that life is the highest value because he obviously can't think of any arguments against it. That is why you need to respond to arguments that your opponent makes, because if you don't respond to it, it implies that you can't think of anything to say against it, you can't disagree with it, which means that you agree with it. Yeah?
Does it have to be the very next round that you respond to it?
So yes, I'm about to go through that right here. So another thing about dropping arguments is, remember how we had the speech order, there's the affirmative constructive, negative constructive, first affirmative rebuttal, etc. So the negative has to respond to everything the affirmative said in his negative constructive. If he doesn't do that in his constructive speech, the affirmative can say in his 1AR that he dropped my case, because the negative can't come back in his negative rebuttal and then respond to everything the affirmative said way back at the beginning of the round, because that's not fair. The affirmative has only 3 minutes of time to respond and defend his case now. You're only allowed to make new arguments in the constructive speeches, so the negative has to respond to the affirmative's case in his constructive speech. Now, the affirmative does have little leeway to make new arguments in his first affirmative rebuttal because he just heard the negative case and that's his first chance to respond to it. So if you're responding to an argument, you have to do it in either the negative constructive or the first affirmative rebuttal. If an argument isn't responded to in those speeches, then it's dropped. You can only argue about those arguments for the rest of the rounds. Cool. So how to think of responses. So if it doesn't sound right, it probably isn't. The most important, if it just doesn't sound right, if something doesn't click, if you're like, that doesn't really make sense, it probably doesn't. And if you think it doesn't make sense, you can probably convince the judge that it doesn't. Another way to think of responses is look for holes in the logical flow of ideas. A lot of Lincoln-Douglas debate arguments go like, this is how it is now, if we do this, then this will happen, and then this will happen, and then this will happen, and then this will happen. In order to prove that, the side making that argument has to prove every step in that logical flow of ideas. If you can break one of those, if one of those steps is link or doesn't make sense, then you can convince the judge that that doesn't make sense, and so their whole flow of ideas just falls apart. Another way to think of responses is don't be afraid to challenge the evidence. If they read a piece of evidence in their constructive case and it just doesn't make sense, or it's from a wacky source, or you don't know who this guys, or they didn't give the credentials for the expert they were citing, don't be afraid to ask during cross-examination, hey, who is this guy? What makes him qualified to speak about this topic? And if they can't think of an answer, bring it up in your next speech and show the judge that evidence doesn't have any weight in the round, because the expert they're citing doesn't have any credentials in that area of expertise, or the source it's from just isn't a very credible source. So next, once you've thought of a response to make to your opponent's argument, you have to then present it to the judge in your speech. And the best way of doing that is to use 4-point refutation. This is a way to make it shows the judge where you are, it allows you to make a good argument, and it allows you to show the judge why that argument matters in the debate round as a whole. So the first point of 4-point refutation is location. Show the judge and your opponent where you are on the flow, because they're going to be flowing. So a simple way to give location is, judge, next I'd like to respond to my opponent's value of societal welfare. That's simply all you have to do, because you told them what you're responding to, and they can look on their flow and see where that argument is, and they can then get ready to flow your response to it. So after you show the judge and your opponent where you are on the flow, next thing you need to do is give the tag for your argument. You give the tag to summarize your arguments. The tag, as you remember, is just a short phrase that summarizes your whole argument, and this allows the judge to write it down on their flow, and it also allows the judge to start thinking about what you might have to say. You can say something, a tag to respond to your opponent's value might be, my value subcedes. My value subceeds. And what subcedes means is that my value encompasses their value. If their value is life, well, my value is human rights, and human rights include the value of life. We have the right to life, liberty, and property. So my value is higher than your value because I provide not only life, but I provide liberty and property as well. So that would be an example of a tag. You just say, my value subcedes, and that shows the judge what you're about to say. The next point of 4-point refutation is the warrant. This is the meat of your response. Give the evidence, examples, and logic to show why you were right. You've shown the judge where you are on the flow. You've given them the tag for your argument. Now you need to show them why your argument is right and why their argument is wrong. To do that, you can use the evidence, examples, and logic like we talked about yesterday. You just need to show why their argument doesn't hold up. And the final part of 4-point refutation might be the most important part, and that is the impact. If you just say, judge their value, supporting their side, or let me think. If you say, judge their contention is false, this isn't how it is in the real world. Next, I'd like to go on to you can't do that because you just told them their contention is wrong. Okay, so what? Why does that matter in the whole scheme of things in a debate round? That's what the impact tells you. You tell the judge why it matters. This could be something like, the impact of their contention being false is that their side isn't upheld because I've knocked down their support for their main idea, so their side falls under and you shouldn't vote for them. That can be an example of an impact. It just shows the judge why it matters. It matters because supporting their side kills people. It matters because supporting their side is going to drive us back into the dark ages. That's an example of those are impacts, and they tell the judge why the argument matters. So just some other tips about making arguments and responses. Ask questions in cross-examination about an argument you're thinking of making. If they may say something about their arguments that'll spark an idea. I've been in cross-examination a lot, and I ask a question about one of their contentions or their value, and then they just say something that makes me think, okay, so I don't really know how to describe it other than that. They'll say something in cross-examination that'll spark an idea in your mind about an argument. They just phrase their, or they summarize their contention in a interesting way, and that'll give you some opportunities to hone in and attack their arguments. And make sure you respond to as much as you can in the negative constructive or first affirmative rebuttal. If, like I said before, if you don't respond to an argument, it's dropped and you're basically concede that to the other side. So you want to make sure you get as much as possible in when you can. And don't be afraid to cross-apply arguments like we had talked about a little bit yesterday. This can save a lot of time. Instead of making the same argument at 3 different places and spending 3 times as much time, you can just make the argument once, and then when you come to the next part, you can just say, "Judge, cross-apply my argument against their first contention," and that saves you a lot. That saves you a lot of time, and you make the same argument, because a lot of times they'll say the same thing in several different areas in their case, or they'll use the same argument at different areas on the flow. And if you cross-apply the arguments, basically saying, "I've dealt with this idea before, I've shown it's wrong, now let's move on to the next point." That's what cross-applying is. So, responding to responses. So say you're the affirmative team, and you're in prep time for your first affirmative rebuttal. And the negative just gave a great speech, he responded to all of your case, and you need to think of responses to his responses. So the first thing you want to do is think back to your argument. What were you trying to say? What were you trying to say when you made that argument? I mean, if it's an argument that was in your case, you probably thought about it for a long time. You've spent a ton of time prepping this case for a tournament. You've spent hours researching this case. You're pretty sure when you made this case that your argument was right? So did they misunderstand your argument or examples? If they did, if they took something, a certain sentence you said in your argument a wrong way, and didn't really respond to the idea of your contention or the idea of your value as a whole, you can just say, "Judge, they're misunderstanding my argument. Here's what my argument was," and then you just repeat what you said in your case and show the judge how they didn't respond to what you were saying. And then attack their logic or their examples. If you can attack their logic for why your argument is wrong, that means they haven't proven your argument is wrong, which means that your argument is right. And then if you attack their examples that they use to respond to it, say if your value was societal progress, basically improving society and progressing society, and they responded with Hitler, saying, "Well, Hitler tried to improve his society," then you can say, "No, he obviously didn't improve his society, because he drove his country into a war that decimated their whole country." So you can attack their examples they use to you can attack their examples and show the judge how that's an extreme example. It doesn't apply to what you were saying. They're misunderstanding your idea. So that's it for responses. Do you guys have any questions about how to respond to an argument or how to think of an argument? Yeah, Anton.
Would that be a tactic, like when you're trying to people misunderstand the argument? Like, let's say you don't actually misunderstand that argument, you actually know what they're saying, but you say that you misunderstand the argument. Would that actually be a tactic to make them actually take one in the rebuttal?
So what do you mean? Like
to waste their time.
So like if you're the negative,
yeah,
and you know what the affirmative's trying to say, but you don't.
But you say you don't.
Yeah, you make a bad argument against it, kind of?
Well, yeah, so that they have to respond to it.
I wouldn't do that, because if you can think of a good argument against their case or their argument, you want to use your argument, because they're going to spend more time trying to recover from that devastating blow you just dealt them. But if you make a bad argument against it, they can just say, "They misunderstood my whole idea," and then you give them the opportunity to repeat what they already said, what they said in their case, and they can convince the judge further of that. So I wouldn't do that. If you have a good argument to use against somebody's case, use that argument. Yeah.
Is there a way when responding to responses to get the judge to finally misunderstand the other person's side, even though you understand it perfectly fine?
You can convince, if you understand it, you can always, you can probably think of reasons why it's wrong. If you understand an idea, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to believe it. You can still think of responses and reasons why that idea might not be so valid. Yeah, Hannah?
Josh, I think what he's trying to say is that even though we understand the argument, should we say that we don't understand it so that they can waste their time? I think that's what he's trying to say.
If you understand an argument and you can think of, you don't want to intentionally give the judge the impression that you're missing the point of their argument, because then the judge is going to think that they misunderstood their argument, they don't really know what they're talking about.
What if he agrees with how you're misunderstanding their argument?
If someone misunderstands your arguments, you're going to realize, because you know what you were trying to say, and if they didn't respond to that, you will know when they misunderstand your case. And all you have to do is say, Judge, they misunderstood my case, here's what I was actually trying to say. And you do not want to give your opponent the opportunity to do that. Yeah, Leah.
Also, if you understand the argument, most likely your judge will as well. Your judge is an adult, most likely they're a parent, they may have a kid that's in LD debate and they've been judging rounds. So if you understand the argument, most likely they will as well. So don't try and pretend to not understand it because you think that they don't understand, because they probably do.
Yeah, I can see how that would be bad.
So any other questions?